England, 1829. The morning mist hung over the grounds of Whitmore Estate, like a veil of melancholy, presaging the dark days that lay ahead. Lady Catherine Whitmore gazed through her chamber window at the landscape she had known since childhood, feeling the weight of a destiny she had not chosen. Her delicate fingers traced the cold outline of the glass, whilst her thoughts wandered to the arranged marriage that approached as inexorably as tides that cannot be stayed. Lord Adrian Blackwood was considered one of the most promising young gentlemen of London society. His charming smile and impeccable manners had won the approval of her father, Sir Alistair Whitmore, a man whose judgment was rarely questioned in matters of propriety and advancement. The match had been settled over brandy and cigars in her father's study, as was customary among families of standing. Catherine had been summoned only to nod her acquiescence, her opinions as irrelevant as the portraits that lined the corridor walls. Yet Catherine harboured a quiet hope that perhaps affection might bloom where arrangement had planted its seeds. Adrian's attentions during their chaperoned visits had been courteous, his conversation pleasant if somewhat practiced. She had convinced herself that respect could ripen into something warmer, that duty and happiness need not be strangers to one another. The first fracture in this carefully constructed illusion came on a humid afternoon, 1 week before the wedding was to take place. Catherine had been returning from the village with her maid, having selected ribbons for her trousseau, when she noticed Adrian's carriage stationed near the old garden pavilion at the edge of the Whitmore grounds. The structure had fallen into disuse, its once elegant columns now wrapped in ivy, a place forgotten by all save the occasional romantic seeking solitude. Something in the furtive manner of the coachman's stance gave Catherine pause. A coldness crept through her despite the summer warmth. She instructed her maid to continue to the main house while she approached the pavilion through the overgrown path, her heart beating with an apprehension she could not name. The sounds reached her before the sight did. Laughter, low and intimate, punctuated by whispers that spoke of familiarity far beyond mere acquaintance. Catherine's breath caught in her throat as she peered through a gap in the weathered lattice. There, in an embrace that left no room for innocent interpretation, stood her betrothed with a woman whose auburn curls cascaded over shoulders bared in scandalous fashion. Adrian's hands traced paths along the woman's form with a tenderness he had never shown Catherine. His lips pressed to her neck as she threw back her head in evident pleasure. The world seemed to tilt beneath Catherine's feet. She grasped the stone pillar to steady herself, her gloves becoming dusty from the neglected surface. Every pretty word Adrian had spoken, every courteous gesture now revealed itself as performance, as hollow as the pavilion itself. The woman in his arms was no stranger either. Catherine recognized her as Miss Eleanor Hartley, a widow of modest means who frequented the same social circles, always hovering at the periphery with calculating eyes. Catherine withdrew as silently as she had come, her mind reeling with the implications. The wedding was but 7 days hence. Invitations had been sent, arrangements finalized, her entire future pledged to a man who was even now betraying that pledge with shameless abandon. Her first instinct was to run to her father, to expose this treachery before it was too late. Yet even as the impulse formed, doubt crept in like poison. Sir Alistair Whitmore was a man of tradition and rigid principles. He valued reputation above all else, and Adrian Blackwood's family connections promised advancement that her father coveted desperately. Would he believe his daughter's word against that of a gentleman whose character seemed beyond reproach? Adrian had cultivated his image with meticulous care, presenting himself as the very model of honourable conduct. Catherine knew with sinking certainty that any accusation would be met with denial, and she possessed no proof save her own testimony. The days that followed were torture of the most exquisite kind. Catherine moved through the wedding preparations like a spectre, her smiles forced, her enthusiasm feigned. She watched Adrian perform his role with masterful precision, playing the devoted fiancé with such conviction that she sometimes wondered if she had imagined what she had witnessed. But the memory remained sharp as broken glass, cutting her with each passing hour. She attempted on 2 separate occasions to speak privately with her father. Each time the words died in her throat as she met his stern gaze, seeing there the weight of expectation and the pride he took in the match he had secured. Sir Alistair had proclaimed to all who would listen that his daughter would soon be Lady Blackwood, ascending to heights he himself had never reached. To shatter that triumph now would be to court his wrath, and Catherine knew well the consequences of her father's displeasure. Thus she remained silent, bearing her knowledge like a stone in her breast, growing heavier with each dawn that brought her closer to a union built upon deceit. The grand ball arrived as all dreaded things must, dressed in splendor that mocked Catherine's inner turmoil. Whitmore House blazed with candlelight, its ballroom filled with the cream of society who had come to celebrate the impending nuptials. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across silks and satins, whilst musicians filled the air with melodies meant to speak of joy and promise. Catherine stood beside Adrian, her hand resting lightly upon his arm, feeling the falseness of the gesture burn like ice. She wore a gown of pale blue silk that her mother had chosen, adorned with pearls that caught the light with each breath she drew. Her hair had been arranged in an elaborate coiffure, threaded with silver ribbons that whispered against her neck as she moved. She looked every inch the blushing bride-to-be, though her heart felt encased in iron. Adrian played his part with characteristic skill, his attention to Catherine solicitous and public, designed to reinforce the image of devotion. Yet Catherine noticed the way his eyes occasionally scanned the crowd, and her stomach clenched when she spotted Eleanor Hartley among the guests, dressed in emerald green that seemed chosen to draw attention. The evening progressed through the expected rituals. Toasts were raised, well-wishes offered, and Catherine smiled until her face ached from the pretense. It was during a momentary respite, when she had stepped away from the crush of bodies to catch her breath near a quieter corner of the ballroom, that desperation finally overwhelmed discretion. Her father appeared at her side, flushed with wine and satisfaction. "You are the envy of every young lady present, Catherine," he proclaimed, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Lord Adrian is a prize beyond measure." The words unlocked something within her, some final reserve of courage or perhaps simply despair. She turned to her father, keeping her voice low despite its urgency. "Papa, I must speak with you. There is something concerning Lord Adrian that you must know before—" But Sir Alistair was not alone. Adrian materialized as if summoned by the mere mention of his name, his expression one of attentive concern. "My dear Lady Catherine appears fatigued," he said smoothly, his hand reaching for her arm in a gesture that appeared protective but felt like a shackle. "Perhaps the excitement has been too much." "I am quite well," Catherine insisted, pulling her arm back with more force than was seemly. Heads turned at the small commotion. "Papa, please, I must insist that we speak privately. It concerns my betrothed's character, and there are matters you must be made aware of before—" The transformation in Adrian's countenance was subtle but complete. The mask of benevolent concern gave way to something harder, more calculating. "Catherine, you are overwrought," he said, his voice carrying now to the growing circle of interested onlookers. "Perhaps the champagne has addled your senses." "I am neither overwrought nor addled," Catherine replied, her voice rising despite her efforts to maintain composure. "I have seen with my own eyes." "Seen what?" Adrian interrupted, and now his tone carried a note of wounded bewilderment that rang false to Catherine's ears, but evidently convinced others. "My dear girl, what strange fancies have taken hold of you?" Sir Alistair's face had darkened from red to purple, his embarrassment at his daughter's public outburst evident to all. "Catherine, control yourself," he hissed. "You are making a spectacle." "A spectacle she has indeed made," Adrian said, and now his voice took on a sorrowful quality that sent chills down Catherine's spine. He addressed not just Sir Alistair, but the assembled guests who had drawn closer, drawn by the promise of scandal like moths to flame. "I had hoped to spare her father this shame, but I fear I must now speak a truth that pains me deeply." Catherine felt the ground shifting beneath her feet, recognizing too late the trap she had walked into. Adrian's expression was one of noble suffering, a man forced against his better judgment to reveal an uncomfortable truth. "It is I who have witnessed betrayal," Adrian proclaimed, his voice carrying the perfect mixture of regret and resolve. "For the past fortnight, I have observed with growing concern Lady Catherine's behavior. I attributed it to bridal nerves, but I fear the truth is far more distressing," He paused, allowing the silence to build, every eye now fixed upon him. "I have discovered that Lady Catherine has been conducting a clandestine correspondence with a gentleman of no standing, a fortune hunter who seeks to compromise her reputation and thereby force my hand into releasing her from our engagement." The gasps that followed were like physical blows. Catherine stared at Adrian in disbelief, unable to comprehend the enormity of his lie. "That is utterly false," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "There is no correspondence, no gentleman. This is a fabrication designed to—" "To what end would I fabricate such a thing?" Adrian asked, spreading his hands in a gesture of helpless honesty. "It brings me no pleasure to expose this, but I cannot in good conscience proceed with a union when trust has been so thoroughly violated. I have the letters intercepted by a servant loyal to my household." He reached into his coat pocket and produced folded papers that Catherine had never seen before. "I had not intended to produce them publicly, but it seems I must defend my honor against these wild accusations." "Let me see those," Sir Alistair demanded, snatching the papers from Adrian's hand. His eyes scanned the contents, and with each line, his expression grew more thunderous. The letters were forgeries, they must be, but they were convincing forgeries. Penned in a hand that resembled Catherine's own, filled with romantic sentiments addressed to someone called R. "Papa, those are not mine," Catherine pleaded, her voice breaking. "I have never written such things. I have never been unfaithful in thought or deed. Please, you must believe me." But Sir Alistair's face showed only rage and mortification. "How dare you?" he said, his voice low and terrible. "How dare you bring such disgrace upon this house, to be caught in your treachery, and then to have the audacity to accuse an honorable gentleman of the very sins you yourself have committed?" "I have committed no sin," Catherine cried, tears now streaming freely down her face, no longer caring for the spectacle she made. "1 week ago I saw Lord Adrian in the garden pavilion with Mrs. Hartley. They were embraced in a manner that left no doubt as to the nature of their relationship. That is the truth I tried to tell you, the truth he now seeks to bury beneath these lies." Adrian's laugh was gentle, pitying, designed to make her appear hysterical. "The poor girl is quite undone," he said to the assembled crowd, shaking his head sadly. "I was indeed at the pavilion last week inspecting it for possible repairs as a surprise for my bride. Mrs. Hartley was there as well, consulting on decorative matters, as she has some experience in such things. If Lady Catherine observed us in conversation and has twisted it into something sordid, I can only attribute it to a guilty conscience seeking to deflect blame." Eleanor Hartley, Catherine noticed with despair, had conveniently disappeared from the ballroom. The crowd murmured amongst themselves, and Catherine could read their judgment in their averted eyes and whispered exchanges. A young lady's word against that of a gentleman was worth little, and when that gentleman possessed proof of her alleged misconduct, it was worth nothing at all. "You will retire to your chambers immediately," Sir Alistair commanded, his hand gripping Catherine's arm with bruising force. "We shall discuss the full extent of your disgrace in private. As for you, Lord Adrian, I can only offer my most profound apologies for my daughter's wanton behavior." "Papa, please," Catherine begged, but her father was already propelling her toward the ballroom doors, his grip unyielding. It was then that a voice cut through the chaos, deep and commanding, carrying an authority that made even Sir Alistair pause. "Unhand the lady." The crowd parted like water before a ship's bow, revealing a figure that commanded attention by mere presence. Count Frederick Ravenshaw stood at the edge of the gathering, his tall frame clothed in black evening dress that seemed to absorb the light around him. His face was angular and striking, marked by features that spoke of both aristocratic lineage and hard-won experience. Dark hair swept back from a high forehead, and his eyes, grey as a winter storm, fixed upon Sir Alistair with an intensity that made the older man release Catherine's arm, as if scalded. Catherine had heard of Count Ravenshaw, as had everyone in society. He was spoken of in whispers, a man who had inherited his title young and wielded power with a discretion that made him both respected and feared. He rarely attended social gatherings, preferring the solitude of his country estates, which made his presence at this ball all the more remarkable. Some said he had loved once and lost, and had never recovered from the wound. Others claimed he simply found society's games beneath his notice. What all agreed upon was that he was not a man to be trifled with. "Count Ravenshaw," Sir Alistair stammered, clearly torn between his anger at his daughter and his reluctance to offend a man of such standing. "This is a private family matter, I assure you. Nothing conducted in a ballroom before 200 witnesses can be considered private," the Count replied, his voice calm but edged with steel. He moved forward with deliberate grace, each step measured, until he stood between Catherine and her accusers. "I have observed this entire exchange, and I find the proceedings deeply troubling." Adrian stepped forward, his mask of wounded nobility still firmly in place. "My Lord Count, I appreciate your concern, but Lady Catherine has made serious accusations against my character, whilst herself being guilty of—" "I am aware of what she has been accused of," Ravenshaw interrupted, his gaze settling on Adrian with an expression that made the younger man falter mid-sentence. "I'm also aware of the documents you have presented as evidence. Most convenient that you should have them upon your person this evening, almost as if you anticipated the need to produce them." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Adrian's features before he recovered his composure. "I carried them as a burden of proof, should Lady Catherine's instability require correction." "Instability," Ravenshaw repeated, turning the word over as if examining a curious specimen. "An interesting characterization for a young lady who by all accounts has been the very model of propriety, until this evening. Tell me, Lord Adrian, how long have you been acquainted with Mrs. Eleanor Hartley?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Adrian's carefully constructed expression wavered. "I am acquainted with many people, my lord. Mrs. Hartley is merely one among—" "She departed the ballroom rather hastily some minutes ago," Ravenshaw observed. One might wonder why, given that the evening's entertainment had only just begun. One might also wonder at the nature of a consultation regarding pavilion repairs that would require such intimate proximity as Lady Catherine described. "You would take the word of a woman proven deceitful?" Adrian demanded, his voice rising with the first hints of genuine emotion. "Those letters are evidence of her character, not mine." "Letters can be forged," Ravenshaw said quietly, but his words carried to every corner of the now silent ballroom. "I have some small experience in such matters. The hand that penned those missives shows signs of careful imitation, but lacks the natural flow of authentic correspondence. The ink appears uniform throughout, suggesting they were all written at once rather than over time, as their dates would suggest. Most tellingly, the paper itself is of a quality that Lady Catherine's household does not use. I make it my business to observe such details." The crowd's murmur shifted, no longer certain in its judgment. Sir Alistair looked between the Count and his daughter, confusion replacing certainty on his features. "Furthermore," Ravenshaw continued, his attention now fixed entirely upon Adrian, "I find it curious that you should speak of honour, whilst your own actions bear scrutiny. I have recently returned from the continent, where I encountered several gentlemen of your acquaintance. They spoke most freely over wine, as gentlemen abroad often do, of your various entanglements. Mrs. Hartley's name featured prominently in these discussions, along with details that would make even the most worldly among us blush." Adrian's face had gone pale, then red, his composure finally cracking. "These are baseless insinuations from a man who has no stake in this matter. Why would you involve yourself in affairs that do not concern you?" "They concern me," Ravenshaw said, and something in his voice made even the musicians in their gallery cease their playing, "because I will not stand by whilst an innocent woman is destroyed by lies to conceal a guilty man's debauchery. I will not watch, as honour is perverted into dishonour, and truth is twisted into falsehood." "You speak of evidence, Lord Adrian. I can produce witnesses to your conduct, testimony that would paint a picture far different from the virtuous portrait you have presented this evening." The threat was clear, and Adrian recognized that the battle had turned against him. His eyes darted around the ballroom, seeking allies or escape, finding neither. "This is outrageous," he said, but his voice had lost its conviction. "I will not stand here and be slandered by a man known for his eccentricity and isolation." "Then do not stand here," Ravenshaw replied with devastating simplicity. "The door is available to you, but know that if you depart, I shall ensure that your true character becomes common knowledge throughout society." Every club, every drawing room, every respectable house will know of your duplicity. The choice is yours." For a long moment, Adrian stood frozen, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him like an edifice built on sand. Then, without another word, he turned and strode from the ballroom, his footsteps echoing in the profound silence he left behind. The spell broke slowly, conversation resuming in hushed tones as guests tried to comprehend what they had witnessed. Sir Alistair stood as if poleaxed, the forged letters hanging limply in his hand. Ravenshaw turned to Catherine, and for the first time since he had intervened, his expression softened. "Lady Catherine," he said, his voice gentler now, though still carrying its natural authority, "I apologize that you have had to endure such treatment. No woman should be subjected to lies and manipulation simply because a man lacks the courage to be honest." Catherine found herself unable to speak, her throat tight with emotions too complex to name. She looked up at the Count, meeting his grey eyes for the first time, and felt something shift within her. There was understanding in that gaze, a recognition of suffering that transcended mere sympathy. He had not intervened out of duty or social obligation. He had acted because he believed her, because he had seen through Adrian's deception where all others had been fooled. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "You believed me when no one else would." "I believed you because I know the truth when I hear it," Ravenshaw replied, "and I know deception when I see it. Lord Adrian is not the man he pretends to be. I have known this for some time, though I lacked reason to expose him until this evening. He has left a trail of broken promises and disappointed hopes across half of England. You, Lady Catherine, have been spared a marriage that would have brought you nothing but misery." Sir Alistair finally found his voice. "Count Ravenshaw, I do not know what to say. If what you claim is true—" "It is true," Ravenshaw said, his tone brooking no argument. "I do not speak frivolously, Sir Alistair, nor do I make accusations I cannot substantiate. Your daughter has done nothing wrong save attempt to reveal a truth that was inconvenient to a skilled liar. You owe her an apology, not censure." The words, delivered with the weight of Ravenshaw's position and reputation, had their intended effect. Sir Alistair looked at Catherine, really looked at her, and seemed to see for the first time the distress in her eyes, the genuine anguish that no guilty party would display. "Catherine," he said slowly, "I may have acted hastily. If the Count's assessment is correct, if those letters were indeed forgeries—" "They were," Catherine said, finding her voice again. "Everything I told you was true, Papa. I saw Adrian with Mrs. Hartley. I tried to warn you, but I knew you would not believe me. And I was right, wasn't I? You believed him over your own daughter." The accusation hung between them, and Sir Alistair had the grace to look ashamed. "I apologize, my child. I should have given you the benefit of doubt before believing the worst." It was an inadequate apology for the public humiliation Catherine had endured, but it was a beginning. The guests had begun to disperse, sensing that the evening's drama had concluded and eager to spread word of what they had witnessed. Tomorrow, Catherine knew, the scandal would ripple through society like stones cast in a pond. But the nature of that scandal had changed. She was no longer the faithless bride, but the innocent victim of a cad's machinations, defended by the enigmatic Count Ravenshaw. As the ballroom emptied, Catherine found herself once more in the Count's presence. He had remained whilst others departed, standing at a respectful distance, but clearly waiting to speak with her again. "Lady Catherine," he said, "I hope you will forgive my presumption in intervening as I did. I know it is not customary for a gentleman to involve himself so directly in another's affairs." "You have nothing to apologize for," Catherine replied. "You saved me from a fate worse than scandal. You saved me from a lifetime shackled to a man without honor. I am in your debt, Count Ravenshaw." "You owe me nothing," he said, and there was something in his voice that made Catherine's heart quicken. "But I would ask one thing if you would permit it." "Ask anything," Catherine said, surprised by her own boldness. "In the days to come, there will be talk. Society will dissect this evening from every angle, and your name will be mentioned in ways both fair and unfair. I would like to offer you whatever protection my influence can provide. More than that, I would like the opportunity to know you better, to understand the courage it took to speak truth when silence would have been easier. Catherine felt warmth flood through her despite the cool evening air drifting through the open terrace doors. "You wish to call upon me?" "If you would permit it," Ravenshaw said. "I know the timing may seem precipitous, given what has just transpired, but I find myself compelled to pursue your acquaintance. There is something in you, Lady Catherine, a strength of character that is rare in our world. I recognized it the moment you stood before your father and attempted to speak truth despite knowing you would not be believed. That kind of courage deserves to be acknowledged, not merely by defense in a ballroom, but by genuine respect and admiration." Catherine looked at him, this enigmatic man who had appeared like a figure from legend to defend her honor. His grey eyes met hers with an intensity that should have been unsettling, but instead felt like coming home after a long journey. She thought of Adrian's practiced charm, how hollow it had proven to be, and contrasted it with Ravenshaw's direct honesty. Here was a man who said what he meant, who acted according to principle rather than advantage. "I would be honored to receive you, Count Ravenshaw," she said softly, "though I must warn you that calling upon me may damage your own reputation. Society may view your defense of me as suspect." A smile touched Ravenshaw's lips, the first she had seen, and it transformed his stern features into something warmer, almost boyish. "Let them think what they will. I have never concerned myself overmuch with society's opinions. I care only for truth and honor, and both reside in you more than in all the ballrooms of London combined." The words should have sounded like flattery, but they did not. They sounded like simple statement of fact, delivered with the same certainty he had shown when confronting Adrian. Catherine felt something unfold within her chest, something that had been locked away since that terrible afternoon at the pavilion. It was hope, she realized. Hope that perhaps her father's poor judgment in arranging her betrothal to Adrian might inadvertently lead to something far better. "Then I shall look forward to your visit," Catherine said, and meant it with every fibre of her being. Ravenshaw bowed, a gesture both formal and somehow intimate. "Until then, Lady Catherine, rest well, knowing that justice, though delayed, has finally arrived." He departed shortly thereafter, leaving Catherine standing in the nearly empty ballroom with her father, who looked both relieved and troubled in equal measure. "That is a formidable man," Sir Alistair said quietly. "If Count Ravenshaw has taken an interest in you, Catherine, it is no small matter. He is one of the most influential peers in England, though he chooses to exercise his power subtly." "I know very little about him," Catherine admitted. "Only what rumour suggests." "Rumour knows even less than you do," her father replied. "Ravenshaw is a man who guards his privacy zealously, but what is known of him speaks to impeccable character. If he says Adrian Blackwood is a scoundrel, then Adrian Blackwood is most certainly a scoundrel. I should have listened to you from the start, daughter. I let ambition cloud my judgment and nearly cost you everything. Can you forgive me?" Catherine considered the question. Her father's actions had hurt her deeply. His willingness to believe the worst of her had cut to the bone. But she also understood the pressures that had driven him, the desire to secure his daughter's future in a world that offered women so few choices. Forgiveness would not come easily, but neither would she allow bitterness to poison their relationship beyond repair. "I can forgive you, Papa," she said finally, "but I hope you have learned that my word has value, that my judgment deserves consideration. I am not merely a commodity to be traded for social advancement." "No," Sir Alistair agreed, his voice heavy with contrition. "You are far more than that, and I have been a fool not to see it sooner. Whatever happens now, whatever comes of the Count's attentions, I promise you this: I will never again arrange your future without your full consent and participation. Your happiness matters more than any alliance I might secure." It was perhaps the most significant concession her father had ever made, and Catherine accepted it with a nod. The events of the evening had changed more than just her marital prospects. They had shifted the very foundation of her relationship with her father, establishing boundaries that had not existed before. The following days passed in a blur of cancelled wedding plans and whispered conversations. The engagement to Adrian was dissolved with remarkable speed, facilitated by the fact that Adrian himself had vanished from London society entirely. Rumour held that he had departed for the continent, though whether this was voluntary exile or strategic retreat remained unclear. Eleanor Hartley had likewise made herself scarce, confirming by her absence what Ravenshaw had implied about her relationship with Adrian. Catherine found herself the subject of intense curiosity and, surprisingly, considerable sympathy. Ravenshaw's intervention had reframed the narrative entirely. She was no longer the scandalous bride who had made wild accusations, but rather the innocent victim who had been saved by an honourable man's courage. The forged letters, upon closer examination by several trusted individuals, were revealed as clumsy fabrications, further vindicating Catherine's claims. In the days following the ball, Count Ravenshaw made his intentions unmistakably clear to society. He attended a gathering at the home of the Duchess of Marlborough, one of society's most influential arbiters, and when questioned about the incident at the Whitmore ball, he spoke with unwavering conviction. Lady Catherine Whitmore demonstrated extraordinary courage in attempting to expose a man of duplicitous character, he said, his voice carrying across the drawing-room. Lord Adrian Blackwood is a deceiver of the first order, and I possess documentation that proves his involvement in several questionable financial schemes, not to mention his scandalous liaison with Mrs. Hartley. Lady Catherine's only fault was in trusting that her father would believe her testimony over the performance of a practiced charlatan. The Duchess, known for her shrewd judgment, nodded thoughtfully. It takes considerable bravery to speak against one's own interests, particularly for a young woman in Lady Catherine's position. The forged letters, I understand, were quite convincing. They were artfully done, Ravenshaw agreed. But art is not truth. I have examined the documents personally and consulted with experts in handwriting analysis. The forgeries were created by a professional scrivener whom Blackwood employed for that express purpose. The man has since fled London, but not before providing a sworn statement to my solicitor regarding Blackwood's instructions. This revelation sent shockwaves through society. Within days, the narrative had completely reversed. Adrian Blackwood was now spoken of as a villain who had attempted to destroy an innocent woman's reputation to cover his own misdeeds. Several other families came forward with stories of broken promises and suspicious financial dealings involving Adrian, each tale adding weight to Catherine's vindication. Sir Alistair, meanwhile, underwent his own transformation. The night of the ball had shaken him profoundly, forcing him to confront the consequences of his blindness. The morning after, he sought out Catherine in the morning room, where she sat attempting to occupy herself with needlework. "Catherine," he said, his voice heavy with emotion as he entered, "may I speak with you?" She set aside her embroidery, noting the lines of worry and regret etched into his face. "Of course, Papa." He sat across from her, hands clasped tightly together. "I owe you more than a simple apology. I owe you an acknowledgement of the grave injustice I nearly perpetrated against you. When you came to me with your concerns about Adrian, I dismissed you. When you tried to warn me, I silenced you. And when you finally found the courage to speak publicly, I condemned you without hesitation." "Papa," Catherine began, but he raised a hand. "Please, let me finish. I have spent these past nights unable to sleep, haunted by the memory of your face when I gripped your arm, when I prepared to drag you from that ballroom in disgrace, my own daughter, whom I should have protected above all others, and I was ready to sacrifice you on the altar of social advancement and wounded pride." Tears gathered in his eyes, and Catherine felt her own throat tighten. She had never seen her father display such vulnerability. "Count Ravenshaw showed me something crucial," Sir Alistair continued. "He showed me what true honour looks like. It is not about maintaining appearances or securing advantageous matches. It is about standing by those who depend upon you, about believing in their character when the world doubts, about defending truth, even when it costs you dearly. You possessed that honour, Catherine. You tried to stop your own wedding to a scoundrel, knowing that your objections would be dismissed, knowing that you would be blamed and condemned. That took a courage I did not recognize because I was too blinded by my own ambitions." He reached across and took her hand. "I am ashamed of how I treated you, but I am also profoundly proud of who you are. You refused to accept injustice in silence. You spoke truth when speaking was dangerous. You are a better person than I have been a father, and I can only hope that in the time remaining to us, I might learn from your example. Catherine felt tears spill down her cheeks. Oh, Papa, I know you wanted what you thought was best for me. You wanted security, position, a future free from worry. Those desires came from love, even if the execution was flawed. The execution was more than flawed, Sir Alistair said firmly. It was fundamentally wrong. I treated you as a possession to be disposed of for maximum advantage, rather than as a person with your own thoughts, feelings, and judgment. I see that now. Count Ravenshaw's intervention was not just a rescue of your reputation, it was a lesson to me in what it means to truly honor those we claim to love. He squeezed her hand. I want you to know something else. When Ravenshaw calls upon you, and I suspect he will continue to do so, he will have my full support. Not because of his title or his wealth, though both are considerable, but because he has proven himself to be a man of genuine integrity. More importantly, because you deserve the right to choose your own path. If your heart leads you toward him, I will rejoice. If it leads you elsewhere or nowhere at all, I will support that as well. Your happiness, your genuine happiness, is all that matters to me now. Catherine embraced her father, feeling the weight of past hurts beginning to lift. Thank you, Papa. That means more to me than you can know. There is one more thing, Sir Alistair said as they separated. I want you to know how deeply I admire your courage to stand in that ballroom, surrounded by judgment and condemnation, and still insist on speaking your truth. That required a strength of character I am only beginning to appreciate. You could have remained silent. You could have gone through with the marriage and dealt with Adrian's betrayals in private, as many women do, but you refused to accept that fate. You fought for yourself when no one else would fight for you. That is the kind of courage that changes the world, Catherine. Never doubt that. It was 15 days after the ball when the flowers arrived. Catherine was in the morning room, attempting to focus on her embroidery and failing miserably, when the butler announced that a delivery had arrived for her. She looked up to see him carrying the most exquisite bouquet she had ever beheld. Roses in shades of cream and blush pink were interwoven with delicate sprigs of lavender and baby's breath, arranged with such artistry that they seemed to glow in the morning light. There is a note, miss, the butler said, presenting both flowers and envelope on a silver tray. Catherine's hands trembled slightly as she opened the envelope. The handwriting was bold and clear, each letter formed with precision. Dear Lady Catherine, I hope these flowers find you well and that the past fortnight has brought you some measure of peace. I have thought of you often since that evening, wondering if you have recovered from the ordeal you were forced to endure. It would be my greatest honor if you would permit me to call upon you at your convenience. I find myself most eager to continue the conversation we began, and to know better the remarkable woman I had the privilege of defending. If you are amenable to this proposal, I shall await your reply with great anticipation. Should you prefer not to receive me, I will understand and respect your wishes entirely, though I confess it would be a profound disappointment. With deepest respect and admiration, Frederick Ravenshaw. Catherine read the note 3 times, her heart beating faster with each perusal. The formality of his words could not disguise the genuine warmth beneath them. He was asking her permission, not presuming upon his intervention to claim some right to her attention. It was so different from Adrian's calculated courtship, where every gesture had been designed to impress others rather than to connect with her. She called for writing materials immediately and composed her response with care. Dear Count Ravenshaw, your thoughtful gift has brightened my morning considerably, and your words have touched me more than I can adequately express. I would be most pleased to receive you at Whitmore House at your earliest convenience, perhaps tomorrow afternoon if that suits your schedule. I confess I am eager to thank you properly for your kindness and to enjoy the conversation you mention, which I have also thought upon frequently since that eventful evening. With sincere gratitude and warm regards, Catherine Whitmore. She dispatched the note immediately, before second thoughts could temper her enthusiasm. Then she sat with the bouquet, breathing in its delicate fragrance and allowing herself to feel something she had not felt in months, genuine excitement about the future. The next afternoon arrived with agonizing slowness. Catherine changed her dress 3 times before settling on a simple but elegant gown of soft grey muslin with rose-coloured embroidery at the sleeves and hem. She instructed her maid to arrange her hair in a looser style than she typically wore, allowing several tendrils to frame her face. She wanted to look her best without appearing as though she had tried too hard. When the butler announced Count Ravenshaw's arrival, Catherine's pulse quickened. She took a moment to compose herself before entering the drawing room, but all her preparations fled from her mind when she saw him standing by the window, backlit by afternoon sun. He turned as she entered, and the smile that crossed his face was warm and genuine. "Lady Catherine," he said, bowing. "Thank you for receiving me. I hope I am not disturbing your day." "Not at all," Catherine replied, gesturing for him to sit. "Your visit is most welcome, and thank you again for the beautiful flowers. They were exquisite." "They pale in comparison to their recipient," Ravenshaw said, and though the words might have sounded like empty flattery from another man, from him they felt like honest observation. They settled into conversation with surprising ease. Ravenshaw spoke of his estates in the north, describing the rugged beauty of the landscape and the challenges of managing such extensive properties. Catherine found herself relaxing in his presence, charmed by the way he listened to her responses with genuine interest rather than merely waiting for his turn to speak. "I must confess," Ravenshaw said, after some time had passed, "I did not come merely to exchange pleasantries, delightful though this conversation has been. I wanted to tell you something I could not say that night in the ballroom." Catherine felt her breath catch. "What is that, my lord?" "When I saw you standing there attempting to defend yourself against those lies, I saw not just courage but integrity of a kind that is vanishingly rare. Most people, faced with such opposition, would have capitulated, would have accepted society's judgment rather than fight a battle they knew they could not win, through conventional means. But you did not surrender. You spoke your truth, despite knowing the cost. That moment revealed more about your character than 1,000 formal introductions could have done." He leaned forward slightly, his grey eyes intense. "I have spent much of my adult life observing society from the margins, watching how people behave when they believe no one of consequence is watching. I have seen great beauty and great ugliness, sometimes in the same individual, but rarely have I seen someone willing to sacrifice their own comfort and reputation in service of truth. That is who you are, Catherine. That is what I saw in you and what I have not been able to forget in the days since." Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes, though whether from relief or happiness she could not say. "You make me sound far more noble than I am. I was terrified that evening. I felt utterly alone and helpless." "Courage is not the absence of fear," Ravenshaw said softly. "It is acting despite fear, doing what is right even when everything argues for silence. You possessed that courage when it mattered most. That is not a small thing, Catherine. It is everything." The use of her given name, spoken with such warmth, sent a thrill through her. "I owe you a debt I can never repay," she said. "If you had not intervened—" "Do not think of debts," Ravenshaw interrupted gently. "What I did required no courage on my part. I simply spoke truth to a man who traffics in lies. The real courage was yours, and I was merely fortunate enough to be present to ensure that courage was not wasted." They talked for hours that afternoon, far longer than propriety strictly allowed. Catherine found herself sharing things she had told no one, speaking of her fears and hopes with a freedom that surprised her. Ravenshaw listened to it all, occasionally offering insights that revealed the depth of his understanding and the breadth of his experience. When he finally took his leave, the light outside had shifted from afternoon gold to early evening amber. "May I call again?" he asked at the door. "I find I am loath to let too much time pass before seeing you again." "Please do," Catherine replied, and realized she meant it with an intensity that went beyond mere politeness. "I would be disappointed if you did not." As Ravenshaw departed, Catherine stood by the window, watching his carriage disappear down the drive. She felt as though she had been sleeping for months and had finally awakened, discovering a world brighter and more full of possibility than she had remembered. The courtship begins. In the weeks that followed, Frederick Ravenshaw became a regular presence at Whitmore House. His visits were proper and chaperoned, adhering to all the requirements of respectable courtship, Yet within those constraints, something profound was growing between them. Frederick's courtship was unlike anything Catherine had experienced with Adrian. Where Adrian had been performative, seeking to impress observers, Frederick was attentive to her alone. He noticed the smallest details, how she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when contemplating a difficult question, how her eyes lit up when discussing poetry, how she bit her lower lip when uncertain. These observations were not weapons to manipulate her, but gifts that showed he truly saw her. He began by bringing her small, thoughtful presents, not expensive jewels meant to dazzle society, but items chosen specifically for her. A first edition of her favorite novel, its pages carefully preserved. A rare botanical specimen for her collection, procured from a traveler recently returned from India. A music box that played the melody she had once mentioned reminded her of her childhood. Each gift demonstrated that he listened, that he remembered, that her preferences mattered to him. Catherine found herself anticipating his visits with an eagerness that surprised her. She would position herself near the morning room window at the hour he typically arrived, watching for his carriage, with a flutter in her chest that felt nothing like the dutiful resignation she had felt waiting for Adrian. When Frederick entered a room, the very air seemed to shift, becoming charged with possibility. Their conversations ranged far beyond the superficial topics typically deemed appropriate for courtship. Frederick asked her opinions on political reforms, on literature, on philosophy. He brought her books from his extensive library, works by Mary Wollstonecraft, treatises on social reform, collections of poetry that challenged conventional thinking. Where Adrian had never inquired about her thoughts on anything of substance, Frederick seemed genuinely interested in her mind. "What do you think of Wordsworth's treatment of nature as a moral teacher?" he asked one afternoon, as they strolled through the Whitmore Gardens, her maid following at a discreet distance. Catherine, delighted by the question, responded thoughtfully. "I find his perspective compelling, though perhaps somewhat idealized. Nature can be both nurturing and cruel, can it not? To view it solely as a benevolent instructor seems to ignore the harsh realities that many people face in their relationship with the natural world." Frederick's eyes lit up with pleasure. "Precisely. You've identified the central weakness in the romantic idealization of nature. Most people simply accept such poetry at face value without engaging critically with its premises. Your ability to appreciate beauty while maintaining intellectual rigor is refreshing." These moments of intellectual connection thrilled Catherine in ways she had not anticipated. She had been raised to believe that men wanted decorative wives, not thinking partners. Yet here was Frederick, clearly delighted by her intelligence, encouraging her to express opinions that would have made Adrian uncomfortable. As the weeks passed, Catherine noticed herself changing. She laughed more freely, spoke more boldly, felt more alive than she had in years. Frederick's genuine interest in her as a person, not as an ornament or a means to social advancement, was liberating. With him, she could be herself without pretense or performance. The falling in love happened gradually, like dawn breaking over a landscape. There was no single moment of revelation, but rather an accumulation of small discoveries. The way Frederick's eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled genuinely, the gentleness with which he handled her father's elderly spaniel, who had taken an immediate liking to him, the passion in his voice when he spoke of improving conditions for his tenants, the quiet strength he displayed in all situations, never needing to prove his worth through boasting or intimidation. One particular afternoon, as they sat in the drawing room discussing a recent parliamentary debate, Catherine realized with startling clarity that she had fallen in love with him. It was not the breathless infatuation she had once mistaken for affection toward Adrian, but something deeper and more substantial. She loved Frederick's mind, his integrity, his kindness. She loved the way he made her feel safe enough to be vulnerable, strong enough to be honest. She loved who she was becoming in his presence, a fuller, freer version of herself. The realization must have shown on her face because Frederick paused mid-sentence and looked at her with concern. "Catherine, are you well?" "Yes," she said softly, meeting his grey eyes. "I am better than well. I am happy, Frederick, truly happy perhaps for the first time in my life." The expression that crossed his face was one of such tender joy that it took her breath away. He reached for her hand, his touch sending warmth through her entire being. "Then my heart is content," he said simply. "Your happiness is all I have sought since the moment we met." Navigating society's whispers. As their courtship became increasingly apparent to society, the gossip mills churned with speculation and judgment. Not everyone approved of Count Ravenshaw's attention to a woman who had so recently been at the center of scandal. At a musical evening hosted by Lady Pemberton, Catherine overheard two matrons discussing her situation in voices that were clearly meant to carry. "The Count is besotted, clearly, but one must wonder at the wisdom of attaching oneself to a woman of such questionable judgment," said Mrs. Ashford, a woman known for her sharp tongue and sharper opinions. "Indeed," agreed her companion, Lady Wexford. "To have made such wild accusations against Lord Adrian in public, it speaks to a certain instability of character, does it not?" Before Catherine could decide whether to confront them or simply withdraw, Frederick appeared at her side. He had clearly heard the exchange, and his expression, while controlled, carried an edge of steel. "Ladies," he said, his voice pleasant but with unmistakable authority, "I could not help but overhear your discussion of Lady Catherine's character. Perhaps you are unaware that Lord Adrian Blackwood fled to the continent, specifically to avoid prosecution for fraud. My solicitors have documented at least 7 instances of financial malfeasance, 3 broken engagements under suspicious circumstances, and one particularly damning liaison that resulted in considerable embarrassment to the family of Mrs. Eleanor Hartley." The two women paled visibly. Frederick continued, his tone remaining conversational despite the devastating nature of his words. "Lady Catherine's wild accusations, as you term them, were in fact perfectly accurate assessments of Blackwood's character. Her only error was in believing that truth would be valued over appearances. I consider her willingness to speak uncomfortable truths, even at great personal cost, to be evidence of exemplary character rather than instability. I would encourage you both to consider how your own reputations might suffer should you continue to malign a woman whose integrity far exceeds that of those who judge her." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Mrs. Ashford and Lady Wexford made hasty excuses and departed, leaving Frederick and Catherine standing together. "You did not need to defend me so forcefully," Catherine said quietly, though she was secretly pleased by his intervention. "I will always defend you," Frederick replied simply, "and I will always ensure that society understands the truth, that you were the victim of a scoundrel's machinations, and that your courage in exposing him deserves admiration, not censure." True to his word, Frederick made a point of publicly demonstrating his regard for Catherine at every opportunity. He ensured they were seen together at the most prestigious events. He spoke openly about his admiration for her character. He made certain that anyone who questioned Catherine's reputation would have to contend with his considerable influence and displeasure. Gradually, society's opinion shifted. The matrons who had whispered about Catherine's wildness began instead to speak of her remarkable courage. The gentlemen who had smirked at her situation began to regard her with respect, recognizing that Count Ravenshaw's championship was not given lightly. Adrian Blackwood's name became synonymous with duplicity, while Catherine's became associated with integrity and strength. Sir Alistair watched this transformation with a mixture of relief and ongoing remorse. One evening, as he and Catherine sat together after dinner, he spoke of his feelings. "I cannot tell you how grateful I am that you did not marry Blackwood," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "Every new revelation about his character makes me realize more fully what disaster I nearly brought upon you. The financial schemes, the multiple betrayals, the callous manipulation. You would have been shackled to a man who would have made your life a misery." He paused, looking at his daughter with genuine admiration. "But more than gratitude, I feel pride. You refused to accept what was being imposed upon you, even when silence would have been easier and safer. You stood up for yourself when I failed to stand up for you. That took extraordinary courage, Catherine. I hope you know how deeply I admire you for it." Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes. "Thank you, Papa. That means more to me than you can know. Count Ravenshaw is a far better man than I am a father," Sir Alistair continued. "He saw immediately what I was too blind to recognize, that your word had value, that your judgment was sound, that you deserved to be believed and defended. I can only hope that in whatever time remains to me, I can learn from his example and from yours." They discovered shared passions for literature and philosophy, spending hours discussing the Romantic poets and debating the merits of various political reforms. Catherine found in Frederick a mind that challenged her own, that did not condescend to her simply because she was a woman, but instead engaged with her thoughts as equals in conversation. On one particular afternoon, as they walked through the gardens of Whitmore Estate under the watchful eye of Catherine's maid, trailing at a discreet distance, Frederick spoke of his own past with a vulnerability that took Catherine's breath away. "I have not always been the solitary figure society now perceives me to be," he said, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "There was a time when I moved through ballrooms and social gatherings with the same careless confidence as any young man of fortune and position. I believed the world was mine to shape as I pleased." "What changed?" Catherine asked gently, sensing that the question touched upon something deep within him. Frederick was silent for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old sorrows. "I fell in love, or what I believed was love at the time. She was beautiful and vivacious, the daughter of a duke, and I was besotted. We became engaged, and I thought myself the most fortunate man in England." He paused, and Catherine saw his jaw tighten. "Then I discovered she had been deceiving me. Her affections were engaged elsewhere, to a man of even greater wealth and title. Our engagement had been merely a stratagem to make him jealous enough to propose. When he finally did, she abandoned me without a second thought." "How terrible," Catherine whispered, her heart aching for the pain she heard beneath his words. "What wounded me most was not the loss of her affections, for I came to realize those had never truly been mine to lose. It was the deception itself, the way she had performed devotion whilst her heart belonged elsewhere. It made me question everything I believed about honor and truth. For years afterward, I withdrew from society, unable to trust what I saw in others' faces or heard in their words." He turned to Catherine then, and the look in his eyes made her pulse quicken. "That is why when I saw you standing in that ballroom speaking truth that no one wanted to hear, I recognized something precious. You were the opposite of everything that had wounded me. Where she had been false, you were genuine. Where she had been calculating, you were courageous." In that moment, Catherine, I felt something I had not felt in more than a decade. I felt hope. Catherine's breath caught in her throat. "Hope for what?" she asked, though she thought she knew the answer. "Hope that perhaps the world still contained people of genuine character. Hope that trust, once broken, might be rebuilt. Hope that I might find someone who valued truth as I do, who understood that honor is not merely a word, but a way of being in the world." He took her hand gently, his touch sending warmth through her despite the autumn chill. "A hope that I might love again, and this time truly, without reservation or fear." "Frederick," Catherine said, his name feeling natural on her lips despite the intimacy it implied. "I hardly know how to respond. These past weeks with you have been unlike anything I have known. After Adrian's betrayal, I thought I would never trust my own judgment again, let alone trust another person so completely. Yet with you, trust feels effortless. When you speak, I believe you. When you make a promise, I know you will keep it. That certainty is a gift beyond measure." "Then you understand what I am trying to say?" Frederick asked, and there was a vulnerability in his expression that made him seem younger, almost boyish. "I think so," Catherine replied, her heart racing. "But I would hear you say it plainly so there can be no misunderstanding between us." Frederick drew a deep breath, and when he spoke, every word was weighted with significance. "Catherine Whitmore, in the short time I have known you, you have awakened feelings I thought long buried. Your courage, your integrity, your gentle spirit, combined with an iron core of principle. All of these have captured my heart completely. I find myself thinking of you constantly, wanting to share every thought and experience with you, imagining a future where we might face life's challenges together. I am asking, with all the sincerity I possess, if you might consider allowing me to court you with the intention of marriage. Not an arrangement made over brandy between fathers, but a true partnership built on mutual respect and affection. Catherine felt tears gathering in her eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, Frederick, I would be honored. These weeks have shown me what courtship should be, what marriage could become with the right partner. You have given me back something I thought Adrian had destroyed. My faith in the possibility of happiness, my belief that love need not be performance but can be genuine and deep and real." The smile that broke across Frederick's face transformed him entirely. He looked almost incandescent with happiness as he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that felt like a sacred vow. "You have made me the happiest of men," he said. "I promise you, Catherine, I shall spend every day proving myself worthy of your trust." "You have already proven it 100 times over," Catherine replied. "From the moment you defended me in that ballroom, you have shown me what true honor looks like. I need no further proof, only the continuation of the partnership we have already begun to build." They stood there in the garden, hands clasped, the autumn leaves swirling around them in patterns of gold and crimson, and Catherine felt as though her life was finally beginning in earnest. All the pain of Adrian's betrayal, all the humiliation of that terrible night, had led her to this moment, to this man, to this feeling of absolute rightness. The formal announcement of their courtship caused considerable stir in society. There were those who viewed it with approval, seeing in Count Ravenshaw's choice a confirmation of Catherine's innocence and worth. Others whispered that the Count had been too hasty, that scandal still clung to the young lady, regardless of how events had unfolded. But Frederick and Catherine cared little for such gossip. They were building something too precious to be undermined by the opinions of people who had not witnessed what they had witnessed, who did not understand what they understood. As autumn deepened into winter, their relationship deepened as well. Frederick introduced Catherine to his closest friends, a small circle of intellectuals and reformers who welcomed her with warmth once they saw how their reserved friend came alive in her presence. Catherine found herself engaging in discussions of politics and social reform that would have been unthinkable in her previous life, her mind expanding with each new idea she encountered. One evening, at a small dinner party hosted by one of Frederick's friends, Catherine found herself in conversation with a lady novelist who had published under a male pseudonym. "You are fortunate in your choice of partner," the woman told Catherine quietly. "Many men speak of wanting an intelligent wife, but few can bear the reality of a woman who challenges them intellectually. Count Ravenshaw is among the rare exceptions. He does not merely tolerate your intelligence, my dear, he delights in it." Catherine glanced across the room to where Frederick stood engaged in animated conversation with a professor of philosophy from Cambridge. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up and smiled, a private communication that spoke of shared understanding and affection. "I am beginning to realize just how fortunate I am," Catherine replied, "not merely because he is intelligent and honorable, but because he sees me as I truly am and loves me not despite it, but because of it." Winter brought with it the season's round of social obligations, and Frederick and Catherine attended together, presenting a united front that gradually won over even the most skeptical members of society. The contrast between Frederick's devotion and Adrian's false performance became increasingly obvious to all who observed them. Where Adrian had been all surface charm and calculated gestures, Frederick was substantial and sincere. His attentions to Catherine were not designed to impress others, but to please her, and that authenticity was evident to anyone with eyes to see. It was at a Christmas ball, 6 months after that fateful night when their lives had first intersected, that Frederick proposed formally. He led Catherine out onto a terrace overlooking a snow-covered garden, the sounds of music and laughter drifting through the open doors behind them. "Catherine," he said, taking both her hands in his, "these past months have been the happiest of my life. You have restored my faith in humanity, in love, in the possibility of true partnership. I cannot imagine my future without you in it, not as an ornament or a convenience, but as my equal partner in all things." He released one of her hands to withdraw a small velvet box from his pocket. Opening it revealed a ring of remarkable beauty, a sapphire the color of midnight sky, surrounded by diamonds that caught the lamplight from within the ballroom. "This ring belonged to my mother," Frederick said. She wore it throughout her marriage to my father, which by all accounts was a true love match. Before she died, she told me to give it only to a woman I loved with my whole heart, a woman who would be not just my wife, but my companion, my confidant, my truest friend. Catherine, you are that woman. Will you marry me? Catherine looked at the ring, then at Frederick's face, seeing there everything she had come to cherish, his strength, his kindness, his unwavering integrity. Yes, she said, her voice clear and certain. Yes, Frederick, I will marry you, not because society expects it or because our families have arranged it, but because I choose you, freely and gladly, with all my heart. Frederick slipped the ring onto her finger, and then for the first time he kissed her. It was gentle and reverent, a kiss that spoke of promises made and futures imagined, and Catherine felt as though every difficult moment of her life had been leading to this perfect instant of joy. When they returned to the ballroom, their happiness was evident to all. Sir Alistair, who had gradually come to appreciate the true worth of the man his daughter had chosen, raised a toast to their health and future. I make no secret of the fact that I erred grievously in my first attempt to secure my daughter's future, he said, his voice carrying through the assembled company. But Providence has a way of correcting our mistakes, and in Count Ravenshaw, Catherine has found a man worthy of her in every respect. I could not be prouder or more grateful. He paused, his eyes meeting Catherine's across the room. My daughter taught me something crucial these past months. She taught me that courage means standing for truth even when the world opposes you. She taught me that a woman's judgment and character matter far more than her obedience. She refused to accept what was being imposed upon her in silence, and in doing so, she saved herself from a fate that would have destroyed her. I am humbled by her strength, and I am honored to call her my daughter. The room erupted in applause, and Catherine felt tears of gratitude streaming down her face. Her father had not only forgiven himself, he had learned from his mistakes and grown into a better man. That transformation was perhaps the most unexpected gift of her entire ordeal. The wedding was set for the following spring, giving them time to plan a celebration that would reflect their values rather than merely society's expectations. Catherine wanted something meaningful rather than ostentatious, and Frederick readily agreed. They would marry in the small chapel on Frederick's country estate, surrounded by close friends and family, in a ceremony focused on their commitment to each other rather than public display. The months between engagement and wedding passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Frederick took Catherine to visit his estates, showing her the lands she would help him oversee as his countess. Catherine was struck by his dedication to his tenants' welfare, the schools he had established for their children, the fair rents he charged, despite being able to command far more. A title brings not just privilege, but responsibility, he told her, as they toured a village on his property. These people depend upon me for their livelihoods. I owe them honest dealing and genuine care, not exploitation. Catherine saw in these actions the same principles that had led him to defend her in that ballroom. Frederick's honor was not situational or performative. It was integral to who he was, manifesting in every aspect of his life. She fell more deeply in love with him each day, not for his title or his wealth, but for the man he was beneath all of that, principled, thoughtful, capable of great tenderness and equally great strength. She also came to understand his past hurts more fully. One evening, as they sat before the fire in his library, Frederick spoke again of the woman who had betrayed him. I do not wish to dwell on the past, he said, but I want you to understand why your honesty means so much to me. When Eleanor, that was her name, when she left me for the other man, I felt as though the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. Not because my heart was so deeply engaged, I realized later, but because I had believed so completely in the image she had presented. I questioned everything after that. Could I trust my own judgment? Could anyone be genuine, or was all the world merely a stage where everyone played assigned roles? How did you find your way back from that doubt? Catherine asked, her hand resting gently on his arm. Time helped, Frederick admitted. Distance from society helped more. But truly, it was not until I saw you standing in that ballroom, refusing to be silent, even when silence would have been easier, that I understood something crucial. Deception requires an audience willing to be deceived. Truth requires only one person brave enough to speak it. You were that person, Catherine. You showed me that authenticity still exists, that not everyone is playing a part. That realization freed me from the prison my past had built around my heart. Then we have saved each other, Catherine said softly. You saved me from a marriage built on lies. I saved you from a life built on distrust. We are even, you and I. Frederick smiled and drew her closer. We are more than even, my love. We are partners now and always. The spring arrived in a flourish of blossoms and birdsong, and with it came Catherine's wedding day. She woke that morning filled not with the dread she had felt approaching her wedding to Adrian, but with a sense of joyful anticipation. Today she would marry the man she loved, not as a duty or an obligation, but as a choice freely made and gladly embraced. Her wedding gown was simpler than the elaborate creation that had been prepared for her marriage to Adrian. This dress was made of ivory silk, flowing and elegant without excessive ornamentation. Catherine wanted Frederick to see her, not merely an expensive display of fabric and jewels. She wore his mother's sapphire ring on her right hand, soon to be joined by a wedding band on her left. The chapel was small and intimate, decorated with spring flowers from Frederick's gardens. Lily of the valley, early roses and branches of flowering cherry that filled the air with delicate fragrance. The guests numbered fewer than 50, all people who genuinely cared for the bride and groom, rather than mere social acquaintances seeking to be seen at a prestigious event. As Catherine walked down the aisle on her father's arm, she saw Frederick waiting for her at the altar, his face reflecting an emotion so profound that it made her own eyes prick with tears. He looked at her not as a prize to be won or an ornament to be displayed, but as though she were the answer to every question he had ever asked, the solution to every loneliness he had ever endured. Sir Alistair placed Catherine's hand in Frederick's, and in that gesture, Catherine felt the weight of her past life lifting away. She was no longer the obedient daughter who had nearly been sacrificed to her father's ambitions. She was no longer the humiliated woman who had been publicly accused and disbelieved. She was simply Catherine, beloved and respected, about to embark on a life built on truth and mutual devotion. The vicar spoke the ancient words of the marriage ceremony, but Catherine barely heard them. She was lost in Frederick's grey eyes, seeing there the reflection of her own happiness, her own certainty that this was right and good and true. When the moment came to speak their vows, Catherine's voice was clear and strong. I, Catherine Whitmore, take thee, Frederick Ravenshaw, to be my wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part. This I pledge to thee with all my heart, freely given and gladly sworn. Frederick's voice, when he spoke his own vows, was equally steady, each word a promise carved in stone. I, Frederick Ravenshaw, take thee, Catherine Whitmore, to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part. This I pledge to thee with all my heart, freely given and gladly sworn. The rings were blessed and exchanged, simple bands of gold that nonetheless carried the weight of everything they meant to each other. And when the vicar finally pronounced them husband and wife, Frederick's kiss was gentle and reverent, a seal upon promises made not just before God and these witnesses, but before each other, the only audience that truly mattered. The wedding breakfast that followed was filled with genuine celebration. There were toasts and laughter, but more than that, there was a palpable sense of rightness, as though everyone present recognized that they were witnessing not merely a social contract, but a true union of souls. As the afternoon wore into evening, Frederick and Catherine finally departed for the main house, where they would spend their first night as husband and wife before departing on a wedding journey to the Lake District. As their carriage pulled away from the chapel, Catherine looked back one last time at the scene of her wedding, so different from the grand spectacle that had been planned for her marriage to Adrian, and felt nothing but gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought her to this moment. "No regrets?" Frederick asked softly, his arm around her shoulders. Catherine turned to him with a smile that came from the very depths of her being. "Not a single one. Everything that happened, even the painful parts, led me to you. How could I regret the path that brought me home?" Frederick pulled her closer, and they rode in comfortable silence through the spring twilight, each lost in thoughts of the future they would build together. Gone were the days of pretense and performance, of duty without devotion, of words that meant nothing. Ahead lay a life of truth and partnership, of love that had been earned through hardship and proven through trial. That night, as they stood together on the balcony of their house, the restored honor of Lady Catherine, continuation, their bedroom, looking out over the moonlit grounds of Ravenshaw Manor, Catherine felt the last vestiges of her old fears dissolve into the night air. Frederick's arms encircled her waist from behind, his chin resting gently on her shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he murmured against her ear. "I am thinking," Catherine replied, leaning back into his embrace, "that I have never felt so completely myself as I do in this moment. With Adrian I was always performing, always trying to be what I thought he wanted, what society expected. With you, I can simply be Catherine, and that is enough." Frederick turned her gently to face him, his hands cupping her face with infinite tenderness. "It is more than enough. It is everything." Their wedding journey to the Lake District proved to be a revelation of shared wonder. They explored the rugged landscape together, Catherine discovering a love of nature's wild beauty that she had never been permitted to indulge before. Frederick delighted in showing her hidden waterfalls and secret paths, places he had discovered during his years of self-imposed solitude. They talked for hours as they walked, their conversations ranging from the profound to the playful, building layers of intimacy that went far beyond the physical. One afternoon, as they stood at the edge of Ullswater watching the light dance across the rippling surface, Frederick spoke of his vision for their future. "I want our marriage to be different from what society expects," he said. "I want you to have agency in all our decisions, to manage your own affairs, to pursue your own interests. I have seen too many marriages where the wife becomes merely an extension of her husband, her own identity subsumed entirely. That is not what I want for us." Catherine felt tears of gratitude gathering. "You cannot know how much those words mean to me. After what happened with Adrian, after feeling so powerless, I feared I would never have control over my own life again." "You have complete control," Frederick assured her. "We are partners, Catherine, equals in all things that matter. Yes, the law may give me certain powers over you, but I pledge to you now that I will never exercise them without your consent. Your money, your property, your choices, all remain yours to command." It was an extraordinary promise, one that flew in the face of conventional marriage arrangements. Catherine understood the gift he was offering her, not just love, but freedom. "I choose to share my life with you," she said softly, "not because I must, but because I wish to." Their return to Ravenshaw Manor marked the beginning of their life together in earnest. Catherine threw herself into learning the management of the estate, working alongside Frederick to understand the needs of their tenants and the workings of the land. She discovered within herself a talent for organization and a genuine care for the people who depended upon them. The tenants, initially wary of their new countess, soon came to respect and admire her. Catherine established a school for the village children, personally overseeing the hiring of teachers and the development of curriculum. She visited the sick, listened to grievances, and worked with Frederick to implement fair policies that balanced the estate's prosperity with the well-being of those who worked the land. "You are a natural leader," Frederick told her one evening as they reviewed the estate accounts together. "The people trust you because they see that you genuinely care about their welfare, not merely your own comfort." "I learned from observing you," Catherine replied. "You showed me that true nobility lies not in titles or bloodlines, but in how we treat those who have less power than ourselves." Their marriage deepened with each passing season. They developed rhythms and rituals that belonged to them alone, morning walks through the gardens, evenings reading aloud to each other in the library, late-night conversations that stretched until dawn. They laughed together, dreamed together, sometimes argued, but always with respect and the commitment to understand each other's perspectives. Catherine found herself becoming the woman she had always been meant to be, strong, capable, unafraid to speak her mind. Frederick's unwavering support gave her the confidence to fully inhabit her own power. She began writing essays on social reform, publishing them under her own name, despite the raised eyebrows this provoked in certain circles. Frederick not only encouraged her writing, but helped her refine her arguments, proud of her willingness to engage with important issues. Their first year of marriage brought challenges alongside joys. An early frost threatened the harvest, requiring difficult decisions about resource allocation. Catherine worked tirelessly alongside Frederick to ensure no family went hungry that winter, opening their own stores and organizing relief efforts. The experience cemented her bond with the estate's people and proved to herself that she possessed strength she had not known existed. Word of Adrian Blackwood occasionally reached them through the social networks they maintained. He had surfaced briefly in Paris, attempting to insinuate himself into society there, but his reputation had preceded him. The families he approached were forewarned by letters from England detailing his schemes and betrayals. Eventually, he disappeared entirely from respectable circles, his name becoming a cautionary tale about the dangers of valuing appearance over substance. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if you had married him?" Frederick asked one evening, as they sat before the fire. Catherine considered the question carefully. "Sometimes, but not with regret. Only with profound gratitude that I found the courage to resist. That terrible night in the ballroom was the worst moment of my life, but it was also the moment I discovered my own strength, and it brought you into my life. How could I regret that?" "You gave me back something I thought I had lost forever," Frederick said quietly. "Hope, faith in human goodness, the belief that authentic connection was possible. You restored parts of myself I had locked away after Eleanor's betrayal." "Then we are even," Catherine smiled, "for you gave me the same gifts. You showed me what love should be, not performance or manipulation, but genuine partnership built on mutual respect and unwavering honesty." As their second year of marriage progressed, Catherine discovered she was with child. The news filled them both with joy, tempered by Catherine's natural anxiety about the dangers of childbirth. Frederick was attentive and supportive throughout her pregnancy, never dismissing her fears but always reassuring her of his presence and love. "Whatever happens," he told her during a particularly difficult night when her fears threatened to overwhelm her, "we face it together. You are not alone in this, Catherine. You will never be alone again." Their daughter was born on a crisp autumn morning, entering the world with a lusty cry that announced her strong spirit. Catherine, exhausted but radiant, held the tiny bundle and felt her heart expand in ways she had not imagined possible. Frederick, tears streaming unashamedly down his face, gazed at his wife and daughter with such profound love that the midwife turned away to give them privacy. "She has your courage," Frederick whispered, touching one tiny, perfect hand. "I can see it already." They named her Eleanor Margaret, Eleanor for Frederick's mother, who had taught him the meaning of true love, and Margaret for Catherine's grandmother, who had been the only member of her family to consistently champion women's education and independence. Little Eleanor would carry forward the legacy of strong women who refused to be constrained by society's narrow expectations. Parenthood brought new dimensions to their partnership. They were united in their determination to raise their daughter differently from how they had been raised. Eleanor would be taught to think critically, to value her own judgment, to speak truth regardless of convenience. She would learn that courage meant standing for what was right, even when the world opposed her, just as her mother had done. Sir Alistair proved to be a devoted grandfather, his transformation from rigid patriarch to supportive parent now extending to the next generation. He spent hours with little Eleanor, telling her stories and teaching her about the estate's history. Catherine observed these interactions with complex emotions, glad that her father had learned and grown, yet still carrying scars from his earlier failures. One afternoon, as they walked together through the gardens with Eleanor toddling between them, Sir Alistair spoke of his regrets. "I wish I could undo the pain I caused you," he said, "but since I cannot, I can only promise to be the grandfather Eleanor deserves and to support you in raising her to be strong and true." "That is all I ask," Catherine replied, taking his hand. "We cannot change the past, but we can shape the future. Eleanor will know a different world than I knew, one where her voice matters, where her choices are respected, where she need never fear speaking uncomfortable truths. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and celebrations, challenges overcome and joys shared. Catherine's writing gained recognition, her essays on women's education and social reform circulating widely and sparking important conversations. Frederick supported her work completely, using his influence to ensure her ideas reached sympathetic ears in Parliament and among other reformers. Their family grew with the addition of twin boys, James and Henry, born 3 years after Eleanor. The nursery at Ravenshaw Manor rang with laughter and the chaos of active children. Catherine marvelled at how different her life had become from what she had once expected. She had not merely escaped a disastrous marriage, she had built something far more valuable in its place. One evening, as they celebrated their 5th wedding anniversary, Frederick presented Catherine with a leather-bound journal. "I have been documenting our story," he explained, "not just the dramatic events of how we met, but the quiet moments that followed. The building of a life together, the deepening of love, the creation of a family. I want our children to understand what real partnership looks like." Catherine opened the journal, her eyes scanning Frederick's careful handwriting. He had captured everything: her courage in the ballroom, their courtship, their wedding, the birth of their children, the work they had done together to improve their estate and support reform efforts. But most moving were the small observations scattered throughout. The way she bit her lip when concentrating, her laughter at unexpected moments, her fierce protectiveness of those she loved. "This is beautiful," she whispered. "It is the story I would have chosen, if I had known to hope for it." "It is our story," Frederick replied, "built not on convenience or arrangement, but on choice and courage and unwavering honesty. It is the story of 2 wounded people who found healing in each other, who refused to let past betrayals define their future, who built something true and lasting against all expectations." As their anniversary celebration continued, surrounded by children and close friends, Catherine reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The girl who had stood in that ballroom 5 years ago, desperate and alone, would hardly recognize the woman she had become. She had found her voice, her strength, her purpose. She had built a marriage that defied convention and exceeded her wildest dreams. The scandal that had once threatened to destroy her had instead become the foundation of her greatest triumph. In exposing Adrian's treachery, she had demonstrated the courage that would define the rest of her life. In standing alone when no one believed her, she had proven to herself that she possessed resources of strength she had never suspected. And in that moment of desperate honesty, she had caught the attention of a man who valued truth above all else. Time brought its inevitable changes. Sir Alistair passed away peacefully in his sleep when Eleanor was 7, having lived long enough to see his daughter flourish and to begin making amends for his earlier failures. His last words to Catherine were an apology and a blessing. "I am sorry for the years I wasted trying to make you into something you were not. But I am grateful beyond measure for the woman you became despite my blindness. You are my greatest achievement, not because of anything I did, but because of who you chose to be when given the chance." Frederick's steadfast support never wavered through the years. When Catherine faced criticism for her outspoken views on women's education, he defended her publicly and privately. When she struggled with doubt about her abilities, he reminded her of every obstacle she had already overcome. When she needed space to pursue her own interests, he gave it freely, understanding that true love meant supporting growth rather than demanding stasis. Their children grew strong and independent, shaped by parents who valued character over conformity. Eleanor developed her mother's courage and her father's analytical mind, becoming a passionate advocate for reform in her own right. The twins inherited their parents' commitment to justice and fairness, growing into young men who treated everyone with respect, regardless of social station. On their 10th anniversary, Catherine and Frederick returned to the small chapel where they had been married. They renewed their vows privately, with only the vicar present speaking words that had even greater meaning after a decade of partnership. "I choose you again," Catherine said, her hand clasped in Frederick's. "Not because I must, but because every day with you has confirmed the rightness of that first choice. You have been my partner, my confidant, my greatest supporter, and my truest friend. I love you more now than I did 10 years ago, because now I know fully what that love means. And I choose you, Frederick replied, his voice thick with emotion. You saved me, Catherine, in ways you may never fully understand. You restored my faith in humanity, in love, in the possibility of authentic connection. You gave me a family, a purpose, a life worth living. Every day with you is a gift I never take for granted. As they walked from the chapel into the spring sunshine, hand in hand as they had been on their wedding day, Catherine felt profound gratitude for the winding path that had led her here. She thought of that terrified young woman who had discovered her betrothed's betrayal, who had tried desperately to speak truth into a world determined to silence her, who had stood alone in a ballroom facing condemnation from all sides. That woman had been broken but not defeated. She had been wounded but not destroyed. And from the ashes of that public humiliation had risen something far stronger and more beautiful than anything she could have imagined. A marriage built on truth, a family founded on love, a life lived with courage and conviction. The restored honor of Lady Catherine had never been about society's validation or the rehabilitation of her reputation, though both had come in time. It had been about something far more fundamental, the restoration of her faith in herself, the reclamation of her own voice, the discovery that she possessed within herself everything she needed to build the life she deserved. And in Frederick, she had found not a rescuer but a partner who saw her clearly, loved her completely, and supported her unconditionally as she became the fullest expression of herself. Their love story was not about a man saving a woman, but about two people choosing each other freely, building something together that neither could have created alone. Years later, when their grandchildren asked about how they had met, Catherine and Frederick would tell the story together, taking turns with the parts they each remembered best. They never glossed over the difficult parts, the betrayal, the public humiliation, the fear and doubt, because those elements were essential to understanding what made their love so precious. The greatest loves, Catherine would tell her granddaughters, are not those that come easily or without cost. They are the ones forged in fire, tested by adversity, strengthened by the choice to keep choosing each other even when the world offers easier paths. Never accept less than what your heart knows you deserve. Never silence your own truth to please others. And never underestimate the power of courage to transform your entire life. The legacy they built together extended far beyond their own family. The reforms Catherine championed helped improve conditions for countless women and families. The estate Frederick and Catherine managed together became a model of fair and progressive practices. Their children carried forward the values they had learned, spreading ripples of positive change through their own lives and choices. On their 25th anniversary, Frederick commissioned a portrait of their family, not a formal, stiff composition, but a warm scene capturing them in the library that had become the heart of their home. Catherine sat surrounded by books and papers from her current writing project, Frederick beside her, with his hand resting gently on her shoulder, their children arranged around them, each engaged in activities that reflected their individual passions and interests. The portrait captured something essential about their family, the genuine affection, the mutual respect, the sense that each person was valued for who they truly were rather than who they were supposed to be. It hung in the main hall of Ravenshaw Manor, a testament to what could be built when courage met love, when honesty met support, when two people committed to growing together rather than standing still. As Catherine stood before the completed portrait, Frederick came to stand beside her. "Do you ever regret the path that brought us here?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Never," Catherine replied firmly. "Every moment of pain, every tear shed, every fear faced, all of it was necessary to bring me to you, to this life, to this family. I would walk through that ballroom again, face that condemnation again, stand alone again, because I know now where that courage leads. It leads here, to this moment, to this love, to this legacy we have built together." She turned to face him, placing her hand over his heart. "You asked me once what I was thinking on our wedding night. I told you I had never felt so completely myself. That has never changed, Frederick. With you, I am always and completely Catherine, Not diminished, not constrained, not forced into a mold too small for my spirit. You gave me the freedom to become who I was meant to be. We gave each other that freedom, Frederick corrected gently. Your courage called forth my own. Your honesty made me brave enough to trust again. Your love healed wounds I thought permanent. We transformed each other, Catherine, through the simple act of choosing to see and value each other's true selves. In the end, the restored honor of Lady Catherine was not bestowed by society or granted by any external authority. It was claimed through her own courage, validated by her own choices, and confirmed by a life lived with integrity and purpose. She had taken the worst moment of her life and transformed it into the catalyst for her greatest happiness. The scandal that could have destroyed her instead became the foundation of her strength. The betrayal that could have broken her spirit instead revealed reserves of courage she had not known she possessed. And the public humiliation that could have silenced her voice instead taught her the value of speaking truth, regardless of cost. Catherine and Frederick's love story became legend in their own time, not because it was perfect or easy, but because it was real. Two people wounded by past betrayals found healing in each other's honesty. Two souls searching for authentic connection discovered it against all odds. Two hearts brave enough to be vulnerable built something that lasted not just years but generations. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren would carry forward the lessons learned. That courage matters, that truth prevails, that love built on genuine respect and unwavering support can withstand any storm. The restored honor of Lady Catherine became not just her own triumph, but a beacon for all who came after, showing that it is never too late to claim your own voice, never too hard to stand for truth, never impossible to transform pain into purpose. And so the story that began in shame and scandal ended in joy and legacy, proving that the darkest moments can give birth to the brightest futures, if only we are brave enough to choose honestly, love truly, and live courageously. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this emotional journey. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to subscribe, like, comment, and share our channel. Your support inspires us to keep creating more stories of love, redemption, and breathtaking twists. Help us reach our first 2,000 subscribers, and together we'll continue sharing tales that warm the heart. At the end of this video, you'll see a suggestion for another of our historical stories. Click and let yourself be enchanted by another unforgettable tale. With all our gratitude, Echoes of Romance.